Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Erin, and for today's video we are going to be talking about the Pennhurst State School and Hospital, otherwise known as the Pennhurst Asylum. So I've been wanting to talk about some of the most haunted places in the United States, and Pennhurst is definitely one of them. And the reason it's so haunted is definitely due to its tragic history. So let's jump into the history of Pennhurst. So Pennhurst is located in Spring City, Pennsylvania. It opened in 1908 as the Eastern Pennsylvania State Institution for the Feeble-Minded and Epileptic. Pennhurst was subject to a ton of controversy throughout its existence, and this was mainly due to the abuse and neglect of its patients. And ultimately this led to its closing in December of 1987. But going back to when Pennhurst first opened as a state institution, the first patient was admitted on November 23rd of 1908. Now this was the first of many patients that were admitted, as it was already overcrowded within 4 years of being opened. So now, given its name as a state institution for the feeble-minded and the epileptic, you would think that mostly it was for people that had epilepsy or different forms of disabilities. However, that wasn't the case. Pennhurst didn't only accept mentally and physically disabled people. It also accepted immigrants, criminals, and orphans that could not be placed anywhere else. So obviously throwing criminals in the mix of all these other people was kind of a recipe for disaster. People were grouped into general categories. Those related to mental capacity were put into groups such as imbecile or insane, because obviously they weren't very politically correct back then when it came to dealing with people with mental disabilities. When it related to the physical side, they were grouped either into being epileptic or healthy, which I find that to be a strange grouping, but I guess that's what they just decided to do. So like many other state institutions like this, Pennhurst essentially ran on its own. And what I mean by that is it had its own power plant, they had police that policed their own grounds, they produced their own food, and anything additional that they needed was usually brought in by rail. So obviously, like I said in the beginning, Pennhurst was overcrowded within 4 years of opening up, and that didn't stop. By the mid-1960s, it had been open for about 50 years, and it housed about 2,791 people. Now this was about 900 more people than it was thought that the buildings could house comfortably. So in the mid-1960s, a man named Bill Baldini ran a 5-part series that was an expose on the conditions that were in Pennhurst. And this was aired on Philadelphia TV 10 to expose the neglect and abuse that patients were receiving at Pennhurst. In this expose, it showed disturbing segments of the living conditions that were in Pennhurst. Now, I don't feel comfortable showing these excerpts from the expose, but if you look for it online, they'll definitely come up, and there's definitely very disturbing video of the patients that's in there. They clearly were being neglected and just kind of left on their own. So if you want to check that out, I would recommend just doing a Google search on it and it'll pop up. But like I said, I'm not comfortable putting it into this video because it is rather disturbing and sad. So during this expose, a patient was asked what he would like more than anything in the world, and his answer was to get out of Pennhurst. How sad is that? Now remember, I said that there were 2,791 patients, give or take, at Pennhurst. During that time in the 1960s, only 200 of them were included in any kind of program that involved like doing arts and crafts, any kind of education, or any kind of recreation. Which, had these patients been put in those types of programs, it would definitely lead to improvement within themselves. Now, after this expose, obviously Pennhurst admitted that they had a lot of shortfallings. They admitted that their buildings were actually falling apart, and that the budget that they were given was short by about $4 million. For all these patients that were housed in Pennhurst, there were only 9 medical doctors and 11 teachers. That's just crazy to me, considering there were almost 3,000 people in this institution. So obviously after all this was exposed, it became quite apparent that Pennhurst just needed to be shut down. However, it took a very long time for that to happen. Remember what I said in the beginning. Pennhurst didn't close down until December of 1987. So it continued running like this for about 2 decades. Like I said, the overcrowding, the lack of funds, the inadequate staffing, and decades of abuse and neglect are ultimately led to what the doors closing in 1987. Now granted, all of this horrible stuff that happened at Pennhurst, there were some good things that came from Pennhurst. So after Pennhurst was exposed, it definitely led to changes in the medical field when coming to institutions like this, to ensure that this abuse and neglect didn't occur at other places like this across the country. So despite there being a lack of resources and support at Pennhurst, there were some patients who did thrive. In fact, while there, they learned how to function in the outside world with the skills that they learned while they were in Pennhurst. In fact, there were a group of patients that were considered working patients, and they helped the paid staff at Pennhurst to care for other patients that were in Pennhurst that needed a lot more care than they did. There were a ton of employees who worked at Pennhurst that really did deeply care for their patients. It was a situation where they just had their hands tied because there wasn't the funding or the staffing they needed in order to properly care for their patients. They did the best that they could with what they were given. In fact, some paid staff would volunteer to come in on their days off to help care for patients. They especially did this on the weekends to help clean and take care of patients, because there was no housekeeping that was provided on the weekends due to their lack of budget. So let's flash forward to today. Presently, Pennhurst is privately owned by somebody, and right now it houses a haunted attraction. Now, given that it's 2020, I don't know that that haunted attraction will be open this year, but generally it houses a haunted attraction. Now, that haunted attraction has also been a subject of controversy just because the attraction is a haunted asylum, and given the past, a lot of people felt that this was in poor taste to do that. However, given that it is an old asylum, I can see why they would do that. So like I said, there is some controversy surrounding it, but it is one of the better haunted attractions that you can go to in that area of Pennsylvania, aside from like Eastern State Penitentiary. Now, obviously, given the neglect and stuff, there is an ominous feeling when it comes to Pennhurst, and a lot of people definitely feel that it's haunted, which I would have to agree with that, given that there were lives lost there, and it wasn't such a great place. I'm sure that there are some people who just feel like they are stuck there. Now, obviously, overall, Pennhurst looks eerie in itself because it's an abandoned building, but you throw on the fact that it was an old asylum, and it definitely adds to that chill factor. Like I said, there's an ominous presence there, and just an overall negative feeling just because of what's happened there in the past. Pennhurst has had a ton of paranormal investigations. In fact, if you search on YouTube, you'll be able to see some, but some of the more notable ones on TV, Ghost Adventures has been there, as well as Ghost Hunters did one of their live Halloween specials at Pennhurst Asylum. So you don't just have to be a famous paranormal investigation team to go investigate at Pennhurst. Now, like I said, given that it's 2020, circumstances may be a little bit different now, but they do have dates where you are allowed to go and you're allowed to investigate, like in your own private groups. They also have day tours that are at Pennhurst if you want to check it out during the day. I'm going to have Pennhurst's website linked down below so you can check it out. So yeah, Pennhurst definitely has a tragic past, like I said. However, I do know that the employees that worked there, they did try their best to work with what they had, and they did deeply care for their patients. I personally would love to go to Pennhurst just to do an investigation someday, and maybe one day that will happen. When, who knows, because the world is just crazy right now. But that is on my bucket list of things to do, so hopefully it will happen eventually. But that is it for this video, guys. If you liked it, please give me a big old thumbs up. If you want to see more videos like this one and you haven't yet subscribed to my channel, make sure you hit the subscribe button down below, and I will catch you guys in my next video. Bye!